Welcome back to Why Blank Lost for Big Brother 26. I'm David Bloomberg, and from the posts I've seen on social media, from the moment the eviction happened, some people may again be thinking there isn't much to discuss this week beyond the obvious, which is don't volunteer to go on the block. And while that is an important point that I will probably yell at least a few more times today, it certainly doesn't cover everything because it still took specific decisions to go from that point to Cedric's actual eviction. And I'm happy to say that Ovi Kabir is back as usual this week to dive into all these discussions with me. Welcome back, Ovi.
Thank you, David. I'm happy to be back. I think anyone who caught last week's episode with Corey, he did wonderful. I was enjoying watching from it. I was hoping you'd have a bit of a more twist and exciting week last week, but I guess the BB gods, they were saying, hey, we need to wait for Ovi to get back here, and we will make sure we leave that for today because David and I have been messaging this whole week, having our notes ready, and we said, you know what, the most difficult situation will be if somehow Cedric goes home. Here we are. Here we are.
Exactly. Yeah, Corey and I had fun talking about a not so fun guy, Kenny, last week. And once again, we appreciate him stepping in. But yeah, now you have a much more surprising eviction to deal with. Last week, I predicted Rubina would be evicted. And for much of this week, that was looking pretty good. I was really proud of myself. But at the last minute, literally Thursday morning, it finally flipped to Cedric. And yeah, it had been moving that direction for a day or two before that, but nobody knew if it would actually happen, in part because it required T-Core and Chemo to actually, do something instead of just talking to each other. But the questions that we have to answer, as always, are why and how it flipped. And to figure that out, we'll follow our usual path of comparing how Cedric played to a set of guiding rules I originally wrote 20 years ago in 2004 and have modified ever since. We'll analyze his actions using what we saw on TV, live feeds, interviews, and other information. And of course, the most recent version of the rules is at robhasawebsite.com/bigbrotherrules. Now, we usually have some other things to discuss about the week. And of course, that's the case this time. I thought a main topic here was going to be about something I just mentioned, which is T-Core and Chemo talking and talking and talking, but not doing, which was the case for most of the week. Indeed, they could have prevented Rubina from ever being on the block if they had spoken up to Quinn like they kept saying they were going to. And Leah would have gone up instead. But we'll talk more about T-Core and Chemo in the rules. So let's talk about Leah instead, because by all rights, she pretty much should have gone up. She was on the right side of the vote this time, but she easily could have been gone due to her attitude and the way she's been treating some of the other players. She's just lucky her spot wasn't blown up.
Yeah, no, Leah is a very interesting player, and I think it's something we said prior to the season happening that I was a bit higher on her. You were a bit lower on her in regards of how we think she would follow the rules, and we found Leah really trying to, at least with the edit showing, right, build up the wants to play against some big threats in front of her. And we're seeing her kind of play this social game, which I actually love seeing her play, but at the same time, unfortunately, being a little messy here and there. I think for Leah, a lot of circumstance, because she's been talking about people behind their back, then kind of being wishy-washy and not having a ton of autonomy to move things forward, which she says she wants to do. But what we've seen so much in the Big Brother house, especially as we get further and further in, when you don't cement your own will into certain moves, maybe not cement the will as much as volunteering yourself as a pawn to be on the block. But when you go the other way from it, when you don't touch anything, you can be, a byproduct of somebody going home. And Leah was, I would argue that kind of happened to Cedric on the other way around. Leah was very close to being the person going home this week if things turned around another way.
Yeah, I mean, for those who don't watch the live feeds and, of course, haven't seen any of this on TV, she pretends. Well, she did pretend sort of to be okay with Quinn. Now she stopped pretending, like she walks out of a room when he walks in. She tells other people he gives her the ick, but then so do most of the guys in the house, apparently. Meanwhile, Quinn, for much of this week, was thinking that he was good with her. And T-Core and Chemo know what Leah is really saying, and they kept talking about, we need to tell Quinn, we need to tell Quinn. They'd have a meeting with Quinn and then not tell him and be like, well, we need to tell Quinn next time. And that's how Rubina ended up getting nominated to begin with. If they had spoken up,
Yeah.
it never would have happened. But that's just one of many big ifs that led to this outcome this week.
Yeah, I mean, every player had to do something wrong for Cedric to go home. I mean, it's really so unfortunate because I really love Cedric. And I know people are going to be
Mhm.
watching from like, hey, I thought you rated Cedric so low on the rankings. And the reason I ranked him so low in perception of before going in, because I was worried that, being the youngest in the home, he would go out early just because of like moves might be out of his control. And yes, this week was in his control in a way, but man,
Yeah.
everything had to go wrong for Cedric to go home.
Yeah. Now, two other people I want to talk about are Tucker and Mackenzie. Before we knew for sure that the flip against Cedric was on, I didn't want it to happen, and I said this on Twitter because Tucker had been saying from the start of the week that he had the votes, and the fact is he never did. He thought he was controlling it, and Cedric would go because of him. And I knew, or I figured, once it was done, he would take credit for it. And it would just be like, no, it's not you. Because, of course, we've talked about how he always thinks he knows what's going on when he really doesn't. We'll have to see how that plays out. But throughout the week, we again saw the same thing, him not having a good read on things while also being 100% sure that he did. For example, Tucker insisted that Quinn didn't have the renomination power after the veto and Angela did, to the point that he was like getting nasty and calling Quinn a liar. And, it actually upset Quinn. He had to go separate himself. I'm not entirely sure what made Tucker so certain that he knew what the power was, because it's not like the diary room would tell him what the secret
Mhm.
power is. But as with everything else, when he thinks something, he is very certain that he is right.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a thing of a lot of confirmation bias in the house, especially from Tucker, and causation might not be correlation. A lot of people took statistics might you've heard that thrown at you, because I mean, from what Tucker sees, if it happens because of other factors, he attributes because of his own will. And again,
Mhm.
that's super fun for us to watch. It's a really
Right.
entertaining. How does that pan out in a long term game? I'm unsure, but I mean, I think a perfect example is when Tucker basically says that he wants to put himself, or he was saying that maybe I will use the veto, not on
Mhm.
myself again, leave myself on the box. It worked so well last week. Well, for Tucker, everything had to go in his way for him to
Right.
not be voted off, last week. It's not because this was a great plan. It was just, it worked out great. Let's not hope that thunder is in a bottle again, or lightning in a bottle. So I think, to your credit, David, what you're saying is completely true, where Tucker is kind of, he has a idea of how things are playing out, and he's
Yeah.
attributing that to himself.
Yeah, and I see that in some of his fans. And I'm not saying all his fans, and it's perfectly fine to be a fan of Tucker, watch him for good TV. But sometimes, like, I posted a clip where me and Corey were talking about Tucker's terrible strategy. And people were like, no, he's great. He's winning all these comps. It's like, comps have nothing to do with strategy. No, he's great. He's fun to watch. Fun to watch has nothing to do with strategy. You could be good at comps, you could be fun to watch and still terrible at strategy. And right now, his ability at comps is keeping him safe so that you're more able to make mistakes strategically when you can just win your way out of it. And that's what we have seen him doing to this point. And, but as Cedric himself noted in an exit interview, there is a thing called the back door. And when the Ainsley AI arena is gone, Cedric at least is predicting Tucker will be too. We'll have to
Yeah.
see. Maybe he'll improve. I mean, week 4 last year, we certainly wouldn't have predicted Jag as the winner. As a matter of fact, week 4 last year, I had pre-written my why Jag lost notes entirely because he was voted out unanimously until he was saved. But anyway, go ahead.
I was just gonna say one thing with because David loves throwing.
Yeah.
We love talking about the Jag situation last year, but one thing I will say to Jag's credit too, he had so less competitions to save himself than Tucker did. This
Right.
whole BBAI is literally made for somebody who's good at competition. Again, I'm not saying it's anywhere that way, but it just helps him in that way because he knows he has at least probably 2 chances to take himself off the block, either whether it's in veto or it's BBAI. So it's one of those things where this type of gameplay is very specific to the season, and also it's not sustainable as we go forward. Maybe we'll eat our words. Maybe Tucker will, but like go on a complete run. But unless he goes on like a Mike Holiday run where he wins every single thing Survivor-esque wise, it'll be tough.
Yeah. And, that's, Corey brought up last time, the AI arena, you only have to beat 2 other people. And it's in these very short carnival type games. Not, I mean, he can win other things too, but it's a very specific area, even if they're different types of games. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But the other thing about Tucker is he also got all pissed off with production for telling him he wasn't 100% right about things because he wanted to kind of crack Rubina's neck when it was hurting. And he said he could do it because he'd known a chiropractor for a long time. Now, first of all, I do want to point out, even when a chiropractor does something like that, there are risks. Be careful. Don't, be careful when you do that. They have caused strokes and stuff like that. Second of all, he's not even a chiropractor. He just knows one. So no way they are going to let him do that. But again, he got all mad because he knows better.
Yeah, I know that part is, and the idea, I don't know, it'll make a few viewers or listeners upset, but the whole practice of, with chiropractors and specific folks who do this stuff, sometimes a little bit, a little pseudo. It's a little placebo effect going on there. So it's just kind of funny in that stuff. Tucker just has I think for him to thrive, he needs to make kind of an enemy, if that makes sense. Some people thrive on that energy. It's kind of like, you need to have a rival for you to like tunnel your energy in and go forward. Tucker excels there. And here's the thing, everything we're saying here, I think Tucker is incredibly entertaining. I think he is the second coming of Zach Rance, like he is his own character. We will remember Tucker. But when we talk about in the terms of, when we have a lot of his fans or other people talking about his gameplay and defending it in certain ways, kind of, we can separate the two. And just because something's worked out its way right now might not be the proof in the pudding that anyone else can replicate this.
Right. Yeah, what's interesting is you mentioned that he always has to have an enemy, and that may factor into the last thing I'm about to talk about, which is he could be a big baby because he walks around calling people all sorts of names, including all sorts of profanities, but then he got mad and apparently is still mad, last I heard, that about Quinn jokingly saying things like calling him a McDorkatron or something like that in his speech last week. Like, really? You're calling people MFers, but McDorkatron is what gets you upset? And it could be what you're saying, that he needs to keep himself constantly amped up. It could also be performative because he claims that sometimes he's just playing a role. But either way, it just, you watch this and it's like, really, Tucker? Really? Come on.
Yeah, no, I want to think it's a bit more performative than it's actually his real persona all the time. I think he understands it's a game. He wants to play it both in the game strategy wise and that. I think there's a certain point, I think he has, I'm not saying he's not trying to win the game. I think he definitely is, but I think he has allowed the fact that he will be a target for the entirety of the game instead of trying to lessen that target. So now he's accepted that threat level, the target level, and he's just going all out and having fun with it, which again, super fun as viewers to watch. But I do think now he's accepted his role in the game, and we're just going to see him go forward there. There's not going to be flexibility in the way he might move, which if there is a why Tucker lost, we'll discuss that. But yeah, I mean, he's a train that's going full throttle.
All right. Well, I wanted to move on to Mackenzie because I wanted to mention she is very lucky. She won the AI arena. From what I saw, it looked like if she hadn't, no house flip was going to save her. This was a one. This was happening one way and one way only, and if
Hmm.
it was this duo against each other, and she won in part because Rubina messed up. When I was watching live, I saw at the very end Rubina looked away from her own table as she grabbed her last two spheres, as Julie kept saying it, because I think she didn't want to call them balls. Um, and she grabbed those and hesitated briefly to look at where Mackenzie was. Considering how close it was at the end, even though we could barely see how close it was at the end, thanks to bad directing, um, I think that was just enough to cause her to lose. And then when I rewatched parts of the episode, there was actually a scene where Tucker was giving her specific advice on how to do the arena. And one thing he said was, don't look at what anyone else is doing, just concentrate on yourself. If this were Survivor, you could not have put these scenes in any better.
Huh?
And they were doing it without knowing the outcome.
Yeah, no, it's without getting too deep into that whole thing, 'cause I was rewatching it actually, and for the first time when I watched it live, I was confused because I thought Rubina won that because the
Mhm.
last scene we see her is basically throwing the last thing, and then we see
Yep.
Mackenzie tag in, and I was confused. Like I didn't realize, like I knew she was close, but not to that level. I mean,
Mhm.
truly a split hair difference there, and I mean, Mackenzie's very lucky that worked out in that's favor. I mean, like you
Yes.
mentioned there, a lot of people, and well, I guess we'll discuss that too in a bit. But there was a lot more favor in Rabina from the people around her who wanted to keep her
Mhm.
in there versus Mackenzie. So, and that's what I said. It's everything had to go wrong,
Right.
or I guess right in the option for Cedric to go home. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
everything.
it just yeah, like you said, a split second difference,
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, one reason Mackenzie would have been voted out if she hadn't won was she told just one example, she told T-Core she didn't really know who to work with because no one talks game to her. And on Thursday's episode, before she got to the arena, we saw her say, I don't know where I lie in this house. That's the answer. If you're saying, I don't know where I lie in the house, you know the answer of where you lie in the house, which is at the bottom. So she could be in serious trouble going forward.
Yeah, I think we could see that. Or now that here's the thing, I think I'm curious to see if she has survived long enough in the war that now the war has coming is going to the factions versus the people on the casualty side. Like I think Cedric, well, yes, Tucker had something. I think Cedric was more of a casualty of the war. I
Yes.
wonder if we're going to see shots actually fired in the coming weeks against the main people versus Quinn, Tucker, or
That's true.
Angela, other people. And so Mackenzie might be able to be a pawn, but survive her way through because her threat level might not be just
Yeah,
as high. We'll see though.
ducking down in the foxhole there.
Yeah, exactly.
So is there anything or anyone else you want to discuss before we get to our regular segment?
You know what? The only thing I'll say is that because we've covered a lot of the people already,
Mhm.
it's just been a fun season to watch so far. I
Yeah.
can't remember the last time, and this is not a diss on any other past season, but I feel like this season specifically has a level of just like fun magic with it. I think the Big Brother producers, other people have been doing pretty good with certain editing of it. I enjoy the cast very much. So the twists for once have worked.
Yeah.
To make it exciting. I mean, just from yesterday's episode, they were just it made it worth it that there was a scramble. Who should they vote for? So I feel like it's just been a really fun season of Big Brother so far. I hope we
Mhm.
continue to keep this train going on. It doesn't feel like it's been a steamroll by any means, and it's very dynamic. So this has been fun recapping it so far. I hope
Yeah.
the viewers and listeners
Yeah.
have been enjoying it as much as we have.
Yeah, well, you said those nice things about production, and so now it's my turn to enter the Julie Chen Moonves is wrong
Exactly.
about blank segment, except I don't really have much to say about her. It more relates to production because I thought it was funny that while those of us watching the live feeds knew Joseph had flipped Thursday morning, so we knew what his vote was going to be. Apparently, nobody told Julie because the way she introduced him as he, came to the diary room to vote made it clear that she thought he was still going to vote out Rubina.
I mean, why bother, right? Like she doesn't. She has her notes, and I guess the person on the note taker was just like, you know what, like why bother? Like let it, go. I mean, it's not going to change anything. Yeah, I mean, for every step forward, there's always two steps back. But yeah, that was very funny to see that it doesn't seem like certain things are translated over.
It's just funny because she always insists she does pay attention to what's going on in the house. It's like, no, you clearly didn't. I do have a more general Big Brother production is wrong about blank as well, because Wednesday's episode started with the announcer saying Quinn was secretly pulling the strings behind the deepfake HOH and then came out of the shadows. No, stop it. The house guests all knew. The audience knew. Everybody knew. He was not in the shadows. He was not secretly pulling the. Everybody knew. Why? Did they write that and have him record it like first thing this week? I don't even understand why they did it that way.
Yeah, I think they really, when they were creating the idea, wanted it to be that it truly is the shadows we have in AI. Is it actually the person, who's HOH, who has a power? Like, make some form of confusion. That was all dispelled very quickly as Quinn told Angela about his power weeks ago. Maybe there should have been a stipulation. I think that would be an interesting thing with certain powers that I know there's power with telling certain people, but maybe a stipulation if people can find out who the power is. If everyone can vote, right? After the power is used, who they think it is, and if they're right, it gets dispelled. I think that'd be kind of a fun little thing to change things up.
Yeah. All right. Well, then before we get to the rules, I do want to mention that, of course, the Survivor version of them comes in a shorter and much more colorful version in poster form. Go to robhasawebsite.com/YXLostFeed, scroll down to the poster and click on it. And then you can also keep scrolling and get the Survivor version on a t-shirt. And you can get the checklist version as well on a t-shirt. Now, the checklist version is the closest to the Big Brother version, but we don't have that yet. And I'm going to make a little revelation here. I have been considering slightly modifying the Big Brother rules to be even closer to the Survivor rules. And so, I don't know that we want to put everything on a shirt just yet until I'm sure what I'm doing, because I feel like there's a couple things that could be adjusted. And so, I don't know that I'll do it mid-season. Yeah, we'll see. But you never know.
This is like Taylor's version of the rules now.
Yeah.
You're going to have we're going to have a hyphen. And maybe since I'm here, it's going to be Ovi's version right there.
That's right. I was going to say, Taylor Hale? What?
Yeah.
So again, for now, you could still do the Survivor version at robhasawebsite.com /YXLostFeed. After the eviction vote, Cedric said, "You volunteer, you miss your shot, you go home." He also told Julie in his extended interview that he lost because Quinn put up Rubina next to him instead of Leah. And T-Core and Chemo wanted her to stick around. Now, both of those are certainly part of the end to Cedric's run in Big Brother, but even combined, they don't tell the whole story. So let's collectively dig in like we're doing military intelligence at the Pentagon, because at RHAP, we know reality TV, and we know why Cedric lost. The first and most important rule is, of course, to scheme and plot. I don't really think Cedric was much of an expert in this area. Not as much as I might expect from someone who was in the intelligence area for the Marines. We could see this both this week when he was a nominee and also last week when he was HOH. But for right now, I want to quote from my Rule 1. The most important attribute of an alliance is that the people in it won't nominate you or vote for you to leave. The second most important attribute is that they will vote the same way as you will for somebody else to head out the door. Actually, let me clarify and emphasize something here. They shouldn't nominate you if they have a lick of sense. Anybody who has been watching the show should know by now that the quote decoy strategy all too often does not work out well for the decoy. It has failed far too many times with the quote safe person being sent home in those cases. In short, don't do it. Also, don't volunteer to be the decoy. Now, clearly, Cedric didn't get the memo, which isn't surprising since he admitted in his interview with Sharon that he really hadn't watched the show before. And I do think that we saw some of that, like when he was hunting for someone to volunteer when he was HOH, and when he was so willing to volunteer when Quinn was HOH.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where there's so many reasons not to. We've had so many examples of past of when you put yourself on the blog, it gets you in trouble. But I think a more thing I'd love people to start looking at more too is that and weighing in your final conversation when you're in the jury, how many times did you avoid the blog? I think some people would look at it as a point of place to be like, I've been on the block this many times, I've survived. Right. But that's only if you've been there every other week. And also, most people look at them and be like, you're on the block every other week. Like, do we really see that as a course of power? So this idea that you're giving up willfully an argument to the jury at the end. So it gives away your win equity, especially like if you're going to go down there with allies or other people, every little matter means. And then two, more than anything, it puts you at risk of going home. And this is such a sad thing is because he knows he also has a big target on his back after last week. I mean, there's certain times to do this if you're going to do this, right? And I still don't think you should ever do it, but there's certain times. And you have somebody knowing that, Tucker, you went completely against Tucker. And I think a lot of people are like, last week, maybe Cedric shouldn't have done what he should have done. He should have kept, shouldn't have he should have tried having Quinn go home, not be upset about this whole flip. I don't think that's still a bad decision. I don't think Cedric was really in the wrong for deciding the way he did. I think this week itself, the biggest reason for him is he overplayed the hand. And when you scheme and plot right there, don't scheme for yourself to be in danger.
Right. Yeah. I mean, last week he was HOH. And instead of strategizing with his allies to figure out the best path to getting out who they want, he spent more time looking for volunteers. And then this week, he didn't learn from those who said, hell no. And, didn't think, they think it's a bad idea. Maybe I should think that too. So again, just in case any future house guests are listening, let me say this clearly. Don't volunteer to go on the block. Now, interestingly, when Cedric was voted out, he claimed to Julie that he knew T-Core and Chemo were iffy. But he said if they proved themselves this week, he was good forever. He explained this further in his other interviews. For example, telling Mike Bloom he volunteered to be a pawn with what he thought was an ingenious plan. He thought Quinn was going to have a vote and believed that with Quinn's vote, it wouldn't matter what T-Core and Chemo did. Now, this could make us mad that the information wasn't put out there clearly for Quinn. But the thing is, it didn't matter because Cedric lost by more than one vote. So it wouldn't have mattered if Quinn had a vote. He took a big risk on a completely misread premise. It's a bad idea to volunteer as a nominee, even if you think you're perfectly safe. It's an even worse idea to do it if you have suspicions that some of your allies might not actually be on your side.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes a counting game there. And it's so frustrating because it's truly like Icarus, the rise and fall so close to the sun. And last week, Cedric was the golden boy in the beginning of it, where I was so high on Cedric after his week one where we talked about it, you and I, that if we go back, he was in trouble. He was one of the few people who did not have a vote. Typically in most seasons, that's an easy vote. That's somebody to go leave out at home, and him being as young as he is, it's an easy target. His social game got him through. He wasn't even a conversation to be going up. He was able to get himself enmeshed into this stuff. Going to the other weeks, he's able to kind of find a way to play through all the rubble and come out clean. And then we have his HOH week, where actually we're seeing a great plan happen. People Tucker wanting to volunteer, and that you're having everything kind of work his way in there to this week, where it doesn't matter how good your game is being played, how well you do certain moves. If you just make one fatal mistake and you put yourself so close to danger, and we see that. And it's a counting game, right? And he said he miscounted there, but sometimes you don't have to actually make it a counting game. It only becomes a counting game and a numbers game when you put yourself in that position. You want to put yourself in a position where you don't have to worry about numbers. You're good outside of it.
Yes, and that is why this specific reason is why I'm wearing this shirt, which is it seemed like a good idea at the time. And
I like that one. I like that one.
Yeah, for those of you just listening, it has a nuclear explosion on it, which kind of exemplifies Cedric's game.
A little darker meaning there, but yes, yeah.
Yes, yes. Now, even with all that said, I mentioned earlier, that was not the only problem here.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, obviously, if he had not done this, if he had not put himself on the block, we definitely wouldn't be talking about him. But once he had, like you said, Ovi, a whole series of events still had to happen. And a big part of that goes back to T-Core and Chemo. Continuing with the theme of Cedric not really knowing how to scheme and plot, at one point this week, T-Core and Chemo asked Cedric what happens when they get down to 8. In other words, the collective is left. And he said, oh, they'll just figure it out, which is the worst possible answer. And he gave that answer because, as he later said in interviews, well, he was going to knock them out first of the collective. Well, yeah, you kind of telegraphed that, but you don't want to do that. The correct answer is to say something about, oh, I'll work directly with you to turn on the others.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that is what they want to hear, and not making it obvious that they're going to be the first to go. But he was either too honest or I think he just didn't know how to lie about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a lot of factors in play in the sense that he's one of the younger castmates coming in there. He's kind of enmeshed himself socially with that, so maybe he felt bad about trying to completely pull the rug over their heads in ways. One thing I think here's the thing, we'll probably talk a little bit more about T-Core and Chemo in this situation, right? And we saw them kind of come out this week and kind of play fiery when they felt like, they were like beasts in waiting, like it's like a tiger in the wild just waiting to get something. But they have to be activated in the sense that they need to see like, okay, let's do something. They're playing very subtle. Cedric, unfortunately, wanted to play in a subtle way where he was, not taking control of things. And he was in a position, though, where honestly, if he leaned and pushed against them and started taking the charge, I think they would have followed right along with him. This is a perfect part of it where they want to talk about the future. He's not including them. He's really showing his moves right there that they're not including his future, so that then they have to make a move.
Right.
Cedric already was in a fiery seat after last week. He didn't want to get blood on his hands, but the way it turned out being is that he actually made a big enemy in Tucker. So at this point, you have to play the hand that's dealt to you, and you need to take the action because we know he has a great social game. He has connections in here. He really just needs to start making the plotting with his friends and people around him and make these moves, not passively.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And I have some more thoughts on that in a minute, but I did want to at least mention he did some last minute strategizing, much to Julie's delight. After the AI arena, we saw him pull aside Chemo and T-Core and try to convince that he was better for their game. And he confirmed in interviews that was indeed what he was trying to do. But let's face it, we've talked before. This sort of last minute thing isn't going to work. It took Chemo and T-Core literally days to finally act. A minute of belated talking from Cedric wasn't going to change that. And that comes back to, the point that you were making, because an important aspect of this rule is that you don't just need to scheme and plot, you need to do it better than those who are against you. And, we just discussed that Cedric claims he knew T-Core and Chemo were iffy, but like you said, he didn't do anything to counter them. It seemed like the whole Pentagon alliance was just on cruise control this week. And, I mentioned earlier that in Cedric's extended interview with Julie, he said he lost because Quinn put up Rubina next to him instead of Leah. and T-Core and Chemo wanted her to stick around. But this brings up the question of why Cedric didn't push harder to get Quinn to put up Leah. Putting aside something we already discussed, which was that T-Core and Chemo should have told Quinn about Leah's true opinions of him. Others in the house knew too. And if Cedric worried about going against Rubina, he should have made his case very clear. Because indeed, if it had not been Rubina, he probably would have been fine. That was the main factor in convincing at least T-Core and probably Chemo to flip. Although I think Chemo is more likely to flip because he wants to work with Tucker. But, um, there were other considerations, such as them not being in the Pentagon, feeling like they were at the bottom of the collective, which they were. They were accurate in that feeling. But like I said, it seems like him being up against Rubina was what really pushed her over the edge. And she even said essentially that in her goodbye message.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, David. I mean, I think when you think of it too, he knew going into it that if Rubina stays on here, that's 3 instant votes for her to stay. Chemo, T-Core, and then Tucker, no matter what, most likely. That's a big risk you're taking already. And especially if you're working hand in hand with Quinn, for example, especially since last week, he was kind of the reason Quinn is still around there for a lot of things. You need to enforce your will a little bit more on Quinn to, hey, let's think this through. I mean, like we said, that it's funny how Leah kind of skated by with nothing like putting her up there when probably all the reasons too just needed one person to say something. Hey, let's put Leah up there. No one did, which again, that could be a testament to circumstance or maybe how well she's played in certain ways too. But yeah, it's one of those frustrating things for Cedric. I feel like it always hurts me when a character, like, not character, but because they're a real person, but a person I really do like.
Tucker is a character. I'm going to say
yeah, a character. Yeah. But a person I like, I feel like it could have been so mitigated. I think it like this type of eviction could have been so mitigated, even with all the things there. Like even though he put himself on the block, even though if he did just one thing differently here, if Cedric kind of took a little bit more control here within the scheming and plotting portion of this, I don't think we see him go out.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's accumulation. That's why we have this. Why we talk about it.
Right. All right. Well, we can move to the second rule, which says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. And I'm sure there will be some who believe Cedric was voted out because he double-crossed Tucker and didn't follow through with the supposed plan to nominate Quinn last week. And you already referenced this. But that's just not the case. For one thing, as Corey and I discussed last week, Cedric didn't actually do that. For another, as I said earlier, Tucker wasn't the one driving this vote anyway. However, there was someone who was double-crossing people and giving away too much information and over-scheming, and that person was Quinn. He exposed the existence of the Pentagon and the story of how it came together to T-Core and Chemo. His goal in doing so was that he wanted to work with them. And that appears to actually have been true. That, one of the few things he said that was true. But instead, it had the opposite effect of making them question where they really stood with him. Now, as I was watching Thursday's episode and T-Core talked about that in the diary room, I kind of face-palmed a little because it seems pretty clear to me that if someone is telling you about another alliance, that means they trust you more. It's not that she found out he was telling the Pentagon about the visionaries. No, he was telling them about his other alliance they say doesn't want to be in anymore. But for whatever reason, she did not see it that way, and that's what counts.
Yeah, I mean, that's the scary thing about trusting people in the house, right? You don't know what's going to go around or how they're going to perceive because each person's so different. And it's one of those things where with Quinn, he has sunk his own boat in so many ways. Character in itself, too. I've enjoyed watching Quinn in many ways, especially with the feud between him and Tucker going back and forth. And I do like that they've been able to kind of keep a little bit more joyful when I think a lot of other players would be like, very it feel icky, it's felt more of a fun rivalry to watch, but that in itself connected to Cedric right there made it so that any plans that Cedric might have not been oversharing Quinn was doing the oversharing for
Right.
him.
Right.
I mean, and also, I mean, we also saw that he didn't loop people in there. I mean, there could be almost an argument for Cedric that he didn't do enough. So he was doing the
Mhm.
opposite of this overplotting, over scheming. But Quinn, connected to the hip in this instance, did there. And one thing I will just say with the whole Tucker thing last week too, it's kind of like, and trust me, I really enjoy watching Tucker play. But it's like if somebody's on the side of the street yelling, saying, the world's going to end, the world's going to end, the world might end next week. And actually, everyone like, you should have listened to him. But in that moment, you're like, why am I like, Tucker was yelling against the wind? He's been
Yeah.
such a wild card. So for Cedric to like put all his points on Tucker and get this plan that really isn't being pushed by Tucker, and then Tucker turns around and says, "You are my enemy." Sometimes there's variables you can't really control, and I think Tucker is one of those. And he just became the enemy that need to be fueled by Tucker.
Yeah. Now, going back to Quinn, another thing I think is that because of his style, or at least a difference in style between him and T-Core and Chemo, they seem to feel more like he was often talking at them rather than with them. Even though he would repeatedly ask for their thoughts, they rarely gave them. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier with them being like, we have to tell Quinn this. And then after they met with him, they're like, next time we have to tell Quinn this. It's like, ugh. They certainly believed they were just being used as numbers for the collective overall. And they were right about that. And nobody cared about their actual opinions. But I think that carried over to Quinn in particular as well. The thing is, I don't believe Quinn felt that way, but he communicated differently than they did, and they just never got on the same page.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think Quinn has rubbed a lot of people the wrong way in different ways. In some ways, I understand it. In the Big Brother house, you get annoyed at people, and in other ways, it's like I think they have been the how should I word this? I'm trying to think the best way, but the causation of just upsetness, frustration. There's somebody you're going to take it out on, and Quinn has been on the receiving end of just losing against Tucker. Like they can't take it out against Tucker because Tucker just keeps on winning. I think Tucker
Right.
would become a pariah in the house if he couldn't win the competitions he's won. We saw that happen to Angela.
Right.
She was a pariah, but she's won certified, powers weight in the house. Quinn in themselves hasn't, and now I think these feelings from Angela, from Tucker, is leaching into the rest of the house, where they're kind of like, ugh. I don't. Maybe we should have. If somebody dislikes Tucker or dislikes Quinn this much in the house, maybe I should be a little bit more wary.
Well, and also Quinn has been, I don't want to say disingenuous, but he's been kind of overacting. I don't know if
Yeah,
if it's his nerves, if it's his whatever, but he's having these conversations and he's amping his personality up. And one in particular that I remember when he went to tell Tucker about that he was putting Rubina up. He was like, "Oh, hey, yeah, all right, hey, stay," just super duper amped up. And when he left the conversation, he was like, "Oh, all right, high five, yeah, all right, Cam, stay handsome, Tucker, no, you love me, I love you." And then afterwards, Tucker's just like, "Oh my god, I can't with this guy," and I think that when you have that going on, it does make you seem less genuine.
yeah,
And I don't think I mean, in that situation, he wasn't being genuine, but when he's talking to Chemo and T-Core, he was being genuine. But once you get that appearance in the house, it's hard to get rid of.
yeah, very much so. And as the weeks get more and more, I think people understand and give a little bit more leeway initially, because they're like, okay, we're playing a game, it's fun, but then it feels like it's more real life as each
Yeah.
day goes by, because you're playing
Yeah.
for this money, you're knowing each other, and these relationships go on and on. So Queen probably needs to become showcase more authentically themselves
Yes.
versus kind of this persona.
Yeah. Now, this overall thing was a perfect example of a situation that you have mentioned before on previous podcasts, where where someone's game is directly impacted by someone else's actions. Cedric didn't spill the beans, but Quinn did, and Quinn was linked to the alliance with Cedric. Not to mention that T-Core and Chemo also felt like Chelsea and Brooklyn were too comfortable and acting like dictators. Again, not Cedric, but Cedric's connected to them. All those other players did things that came back to haunt Cedric.
Yeah, I mean, truly the bearer of bad news. Like we said, that he wasn't the one truly overplaying this week or these weeks. He played a very good lay low game, and at times, what our criticism has been with his gameplay has been a little too passive in it. But I guess you can play passive and get the target on you when you have alliance members like he does, where they just want to tell everybody everything. And continue to do so. There's no, I think I'm curious that whether you think this is a byproduct, David, of we haven't had true any big alliances really, more so of like sub alliances that have kind of intersected. Like I feel like the entire house is still, aside from maybe Angela, very like to the big Venn diagram. They're all parts of different parts of it. How do you feel about that?
I think that there is a big alliance. It's the collective. And then there's a sub-alliance within that, which is the Pentagon. And there's a sub-alliance within that, which is the core. And then, there are offshoots. I think it's pretty typical. I don't think, looking at Dolphica's map that she does of the, and I hope I pronounced that name right. Showing it. I don't think it looked particularly crazy, in comparing it to other times. So I think it's pretty standard. It's, there aren't two specific sides of the house. There was one big side of the house, and then a bunch of kind of people doing different random things that all came together this time.
Yeah, I guess for me, I feel like it's a little bit more fluid in the way that people are willing to work outside of their subgroups. And because of that, I feel like some people, information moves a little bit more readily this season, what we're seeing. And that's kind of for Cedric's downfall, is that any information he might not have been putting, people even outside of the alliance or within other portions were getting this information because other people were sharing it all around.
Right. No, yeah, I agree with that. All right. Well, the third rule talks about the need to be flexible. How do you think Cedric did here?
It's tough because, like, I do think Cedric was somewhat flexible throughout his game, as we've seen him kind of navigate with different players, talk to them. I also think this last week when Kenny went home, Cedric really tried to weigh both decisions of how we should make this, navigate this, who should try to go home, who should I push for. This week, I mean, you could almost argue that he was flexible to a fault where he's like, all right, put me on the block, I think he didn't have, I wish he had a little bit more inflexibility. I think that's my issue with Cedric in this situation, because I feel like if he was a little bit more stringent, if he had the rules per se, David's rules here, and he stuck by them, then he would have been like, let's not do this. I know this shouldn't be good. But for him, he's like, you know what? I can risk it for the biscuit. I might be able to outsmart them. So thinking that he could get a leverage up within the game, he was willing to put a little bit more risk than it probably was worth. So I don't truly think his flexibility in terms is what sent him home. You might disagree with me on here, but I think more so is just misplaying the level of flexibility where he should be at.
Yeah, I mean, I think he showed some flexibility in the way he was willing to hear people out on different ideas, as he did with Tucker's plan to target Quinn last week, and also in the way he made a final 2 deal with Quinn that he later told Julie he knew was fake. But the thing about being flexible is you need to use it to your advantage, and I don't think he succeeded in that way. Yeah. In our preseason podcast, I discussed how Cedric said he planned to be flexible and take it step by step each week. He mentioned that he had seen people come in with plans that were too specific and that didn't work. And I noted that he was right about that, but I wanted to hear a little bit more about his thoughts on a plan. Just taking it week by week doesn't say much if we don't know what he's going to be doing each week. So that's what I said. And I think that was part of the problem here. I really don't think he had a solid plan. He got in with an alliance, and then he was just going along, kind of like I said, cruise control for the alliance. As I mentioned earlier, when T-Core and Chemo asked him what would happen later, he didn't have that good answer. He was trying to still be or appear flexible, and they didn't want flexible at that point.
Well put. I mean, they did not.
Yeah.
They wanted him one way and one way only. And when they wasn't, going home.
Yeah. So the fourth rule says players should not let their emotions control him. And I think Cedric did a very good job here, especially for someone his age. He was mature. He held his ground under pressure. He made the moves he thought were the best for his strategy. We saw this most clearly when he was HOH and Tucker put the pressure on him to nominate Quinn as a replacement. But Cedric thought it through, determined it wasn't good for him. And then when Tucker came at him hard with a bunch of yelling and accusations, Cedric maintained his composure. And, as I think I said last week, he's probably used to a Marine drill sergeant yelling at him, so this was nothing. But still, it's difficult in that house to have someone coming at you screaming, telling you that you did something wrong, you double-crossed them, when you know you didn't. It's hard not to end up just yelling right back at them again.
100%. I think Cedric should not hold their head in shame for any reason, but specifically to for this, they control their emotions so well. I think there's so many players in the past and even outside of the house would react completely different than Cedric did when he was faced with challenges, and he kept a steady hand. And that's the thing. I think I love that we're able to talk about Cedric. I feel like all the moves he made, we can disagree on whether how we believe those moves were actually happened, like if they were good moves or not. But he did every move he thought that would help him get further in the game. Like he thought about it.
Right.
It wasn't without just some random thought. He just miscalculated from our viewpoint. Hindsight's 2020, right? Like we said, everything literally had to go wrong. Maybe he could have got ahead somewhat there. We don't think the risk was worth it, and it shows it wasn't. But I mean, emotionally, he did not make moves based on that. He did not try to go at people in a way that hurt his game. I mean, yeah, I mean, I would love to see Cedric in some other version out there. And if we have other players who are younger who go into the house, I think they really should look at Cedric's game and the point of how do you control yourself under pressure, because he did a phenomenal job.
Yeah. All right. Well, the fifth rule says players need to pretend to be nice and play the social game. And you've already talked about this a couple times. He started out as one of the mascots. He could have easily been targeted from week one. And certainly the overall house agreement not to target him and Chelsea helped. But what helped even more was that he's just such a nice guy. In our preseason podcast, I said I thought he'd be instantly likable, and he was. Nobody had a crossword to say about him. Even those who voted him out were all extremely upset about it. They all had to follow the fourth rule themselves to put aside their emotions about him and make a move that was best for their own games. As T-Core said, for example, I love Cedric and trust him the most out of the Pentagon members, but I want to keep Rubina.
Yeah, it's just so tough because he went against basically his kryptonite in the house at that point.
Yes.
But it wasn't any doing of his social game. I mean, it was a doing of other people's social game that really threw Cedric under the bus there. I mean, when you have the people voting you out being like feeling bad about it this early in the game, you've done something really well there. I mean, like I mean, I've been talking about this entire podcast, but I mean, his social game is really what put him and set him up in the best position. I mean, it was one of those things where I also think it's unusual to see somebody as young as him go into the house and have that level of social game with other players. Typically, we see if people who are younger in the house go there and they go far, it's because they have either won a few comps here and there, or they have found a way to kind of get themselves into a strong group of people who won't throw them under the bus and they make it far. Versus Cedric was the one really pulling his own horse.
All right, well, the sixth rule warns against being too much of a threat, and Cedric had, of course, won an HOH comp. It was seen as someone who could theoretically compete against Tucker. Do you think that or other aspects of his game made players consider him a threat?
I think that definitely, I don't think that poked him in the essence of Tucker coming at him. I think Tucker saw him as somebody he could go against and like push it at. And the House saw that this was a warrior against Tucker. So then at that point, somebody's got to get slayed, one
Mhm.
side or the other side. So when you go into battle for Tucker, his goal, even when he was considering, like, maybe should I not take myself off the block? So I should go against Cedric because he viewed Cedric as such a threat that he might potentially leave himself on the block to ensure that Cedric couldn't win that BBAI competition. So when Cedric didn't win the BBAI competition to the surprise of a lot of the house guests there, they're like, we have no choice but to take this shot now, too. So, and I think also because of Quinn becoming the other side's boogeyman, and then essentially connecting himself, to Cedric, you have this threat level between Rubina and him. Like, it's no question he should go home. Mackenzie and him, that's where we say that, his social game of Cedric game probably still would beat out Mackenzie, and Mackenzie would go home at that point.
Yep.
But in this part, it doesn't matter. It's just whoever you're up against, the threat level. So his was by far more than Rubina.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think Tucker was a threat in a more general way. It wasn't so much him personally as it was him as a member of the Pentagon. We've already discussed he wasn't out there being a super schemer. He wasn't aiming to take most people out specifically, but he was on the team of those who were going to do that down the road. And that made him part of an overall larger threat because he could be used as an ally or a comp winner or even just a number by those other people. And almost everyone who voted him out realized they were not part of his long-term plan or the plan of his allies.
Yeah, I mean, it's there. It's one of those things where it's like it doesn't send you home, but it's a part of it. I think that's what we're seeing for Cedric.
Yeah. All right. Well, the seventh rule says to trust almost nobody. Cedric clearly had several problems here. We discussed earlier how he seemed to have full trust in the Pentagon and also thought the collective would hold together. Meanwhile, Quinn was exposing the former, and Joseph was willing to flip on the latter when the time came, which it turned out to be good because Cedric said in his interview that after getting rid of T-Core and Chemo, they would have gotten rid of Joseph next. Even worse, though, is what we already mentioned about how he was a bit worried about T-Core and Chemo. Yet he still acted as if they were solidly on board. If you don't trust someone completely, you need to take measures to guard against them, not let's see what happens and test them.
Yeah, it's when you straddle that line that Cedric was. When you straddle that line and you're kind of playing that middle portion of it, you have to be so wary about what you're giving onto the other side. And so, especially with T-Core and Chemo, when you think about how they're so, and Cedric might not have known this at that point, but when they are so, like, even with Quinn throwing them information, right? And they're like, very cautious against trusting anybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
With Cedric in that situation, if they're not even getting any form of confirmation from him, it's not even 50%, they're going to turn completely, which we did see there. So he really needed to trust us the people he knew he could trust at that point. But I think that's the tough part. I think that was kind of his double-edged sword. Cedric was so social, so friendly with everybody there. He didn't know because no one was really actively, other than Tucker, showing against him.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard for Cedric to know that he might have been that trouble because he's been so friendly with everyone, and they eat off his energy. So it's almost his social game kind of masked his ability to see that. Oh wait, these can be enemies too.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, it is about time to wrap things up. So, what are your final thoughts about Cedric?
Oh man, I mean, I'm very happy Cedric came on the show and surprised my initial expectations, in which I was worried that hey, he could be early boot because of him not being able to play the game or having missteps or other factors outside of his control. Some of those factors outside of his control did send him home, but overall, I think Cedric played a really fun game to watch. From being a social butterfly in there, to navigating himself in there, to using his power when he did have power in the house in a not a bad way. I think more than anything, what sent him home was the allies around him and his inability to kind of control the game and move it forward the way he needed to do that. I think a lot of that comes with life experience. I think when you're going into the house so young, you don't tend to take control immediately in the house and let other people do it for yourself. He was put in a situation where he needed to start being kind of the director of his own ship within there. He didn't do that. And for all the reasons and basically everything that could go wrong that went wrong on top of him volunteering to be on the block, it sent Cedric home. Great guy. Loved watching him play. And I do think future players who are younger can kind of take an eye at his game and be like, hey, let's emulate these things and just not volunteer to go on the block.
Yes, yes. So also, I want to start to follow up by what you just said. Let me say one more time: don't volunteer to go on the block. But
Yep, don't.
while Cedric would obviously still be in the game if he hadn't done that, it was only the first domino to fall. For most of the week, it seemed like there would be a big enough gap between that domino and the last run that he would be fine. But as time went on, more pieces were just put in place against him. Just the fact that Cedric was a member of an alliance that T-Core and Chemo didn't trust was already an issue. Him being unable to reassure them of their position for the long term was a further strike against him. Quinn revealing the existence of the Pentagon was a strike against all of that group and added to those two feeling generally unheard and unappreciated. And the final straw was Cedric being up against Rubina, and T-Core especially really wanted to work with her. For most of these, it was less about Cedric doing something wrong than it was about his allies doing something wrong. Indeed, most of those who evicted him had nothing against Cedric, and we even saw Chemo crying after he voted. Cedric was a pawn in a literal sense. They sacrificed him because they couldn't get to the queens or the rooks or the bishops in this round, but they still needed to weaken the other side. Sometimes Big Brother players get voted out because they make terrible mistakes. Sometimes it's because other people screw up. And sometimes it's a combination of the worst of both worlds. Cedric screwed up big time by volunteering. But after that, almost everything that played into the decision to evict him was caused by others and his association with them. And that is why Cedric lost.
Well put. Well put.
Thank you. All right. Well, we will have our spoiler-free predictions in a moment after a few other pieces of information. And of course, if you want our full spoilery thoughts, we're all over social media.
Yes, don't forget that both of us are very active on a number of different social media platforms where we discuss Big Brother and other topics. On Twitter, I'm at the Ovi Kabir. On Instagram, I'm at Ovi Kabir. And on TikTok, I'm at Basmati Boy. David is truly all over the place, but you can track him down a few different ways. You can find him on his various accounts through his Linktree at Linktree/David Bloomberg. Or you can find him on Twitter and Blue Sky or at David Bloomberg. Now, on Threads, he is at David Bloomberg TV because that's linked to Instagram, and he's at David Bloomberg TV on the video platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Yes, I put up for the video people my link tree there. You can see what it looks like and go there and click on those various things. Now, for the video sites, since Big Brother has started, I have been posting 3 or even more videos per day at TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. They've been mostly Big Brother, both about the show and the live feeds and my thoughts on what's going on. Also, Claim to Fame, the occasional one from the Amazing Race Canada, and I just finished out the Traders New Zealand. So be sure to check all those out. Now it's time for predictions. And as I mentioned, these are spoiler free. So even though we know, who won HOH as we're recording this, because like I stayed up to watch the wall comp, we're not going to talk about anything that happened there. And so I wrote this all while I was waiting for the wall comp to start. And so had no idea. With that in mind, things were completely up in the air as the players head to the wall comp, but only 4 players were out of the loop: Chelsea, Brooklyn, Cam, and presumably Quinn. If one of them don't win the wall comp, all of them are potentially in trouble. And sure, it's possible there could be a reshift, maybe even likely, but I'm going to say those 4 will stay the most likely targets for now. So from a purely math perspective, I'm going to say they will not win. Tucker has been bragging all week that he can beat everyone on the wall. So we'll find out if he can put his money where his mouth is. Even if not, I think there are others in that group that have a decent shot and would still target the four I mentioned. Cam's name has come up quite a bit because of his physicality. Quinn's name has come up a lot because he's Quinn. And both Chelsea and Brooklyn have been called out as a duo who were in good positions. My guess is the initial nominations will be Quinn, Cam, and Brooklyn. And then Chelsea will go up if one of them comes down due to veto. In the end, I think Quinn will find a way to get back onto the good side, or at least not the really bad side of enough players so that he can stick around. Like we already saw this past week, Joseph, when he was talking to Tucker, being like, no, we shouldn't target Quinn. We should keep Quinn around. So, it's possible that he can stick around. And so my prediction is we'll say goodbye to Cam.
I think I'm a little bit on the different fence of this portion. I've been saying Quinn is going to go home every week, basically through some form of twist, and it's somehow he has skated his way by. Before it was a long shot, now it's looking like a reality. Like you said, I think it's a mass game. I don't see there's any world, especially when we have 3 nominations, unless Quinn wins his HOH, that Quinn doesn't go on the block. I think Quinn, alongside Brooklyn, who I think has a lot of attention on her, and I don't know how well she's going to be able to navigate this kind of twist on her, this on that. I don't know about Cam going yet. I wonder if Cam still has some fuel in the thing. I can see Mackenzie going on as his third portion. So I think it's going to be Mackenzie, Quinn, and Brooklyn. There's also supposed to be an America twist this week. I don't know the power. I don't know if they've announced what that power will be.
They announced it on Thursday. It is a big nothing burger. It is nothing.
Okay.
It's literally they just get to, because I thought I missed it too when they announced it. It's just that they get to do like some of those imitation videos in the hologram box of other house guests saying something and spread misinformation. But everyone's going to know that someone else is doing that and it's not really them. And so again, it's a big nothing. Which is fine. Okay. I'd rather have an America's vote for a big nothing than anything else.
I like that. That's good. I like that. I wasn't exactly sure. So then if that doesn't play in there, that's the 3 I think going. I think Brooklyn ends up going home somehow. I like you, as much as I think that Quinn has a chance of going home this week, I think they find a way.
I thought you were leading up towards predicting Quinn again.
No, I think Quinn will find a way. And I also think, especially with the BBAI, and I don't think Quinn is going to be bad at these competitions. If they go straight up between a veto and a BBAI, I think there's a chance Quinn comes down. I think Brooklyn is going to be a consensus in the House. And I also think one reason is you have 2 vocal people. You have Tucker, but you have also Angela. I think Angela will be pushing for to say if she isn't the one who doesn't win or isn't a person on that. I think she's going to be pushing for Brooklyn to go home.
Yeah. All right.
And with that in mind, as we wrap up, I want to encourage people to check out our RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com/patron. Rob has several patron-only podcasts for Big Brother, plus other perks like the Facebook group and Discord. You can help support shows like ours and everything on the network by becoming a patron at robhasawebsite.com/patron.
And make sure you're subscribed to all of our RHAP podcasts by either going to the YX Lost feed page or subscribe directly to the RHAP Big Brother feed at robhasawebsite.com/Big Brother. You'll find a ton of great content like the daily live feed updates, the stock watch, interviews, and much more.
Finally, we want to thank Scott St. Pierre, Jessica Sterling, and the whole RHAP reality TV wrap-ups behind the scenes team for all the work they do, editing and posting and everything else. We really appreciate everything they do to get our voice from our microphones to your ears. And of course, I have to thank all the listeners and watchers for tuning in with us this week. I think we have a wonderful season. I want to hear your thoughts. So are you liking what's going on? Do you agree with us on our evaluation of Cedric's game? Do you think there's something he could have done differently or did something completely right that he should have stayed home? Tell us your thoughts in the comments and or send us something on social media because we're active on there too.
Yes. Yes. And thank you, of course, Ovi, for another great episode. We will be back next week. Who knows what's going to happen? Which you could say that every week, it seems like, but especially now, I think. Who knows what's going to happen? But we will be right back here in a week to talk about whoever gets the bad end of it. We'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.
This is why blank lost. And this is why blank lost. Baby, this is why blank